Good morning, everyone. Great to see you all here. I'm glad you got the message that we're having one service between all three churches today. So once in a while, we enjoy doing this, don't we? And it's great to see everybody here, and welcome. So we're having a party later, from what I understand, and I appreciate you sticking around if you'd like to. We're having a potluck and some cake made by D. Show in honor of my graduation, so thanks to everybody who planned this for me and for Wendy. It's much appreciated. So we have a couple of announcements today. These are in your bulletin on the insert. And just some basic stuff, really. We have Bible study at Montour this week. We had a 1-week break because I was gone last week. But if you are part of the Bible study or you'd like to become part of the Bible study, 1 o'clock on Tuesdays is when we meet over in Montour. We're working through the book of Acts right now. And I don't remember what chapter we're on exactly. 16, maybe 17. I don't know. Anyway, we'll pick up where we left off on Tuesday. So Wednesday is God's Kids Connection after school. If you have a young person who's either like in your family or even a neighbor, you can let them know that they're welcome to come on Wednesdays here at Tama. And then tonight over in Toledo, I'm looking for Lori Johnson, who isn't here yet. So we have Card Club at Christ Church, and the time is at 5 to 7. And basically the way it works, everyone's welcome. You don't have to know a particular game, and I guess they take a survey of what games people know when you get there. So that's how they determine which games they play each time. So everyone's welcome to come to that. Let's see here. That is all the notes that I think I'm going to highlight. You can read through the rest of them as you like. Are there any other announcements that you have this morning? Anybody? Okay. Well, let's stand as we join together in our call to worship. It's from Psalm 107. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever.
Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, those who redeem from trouble and gather in from the lands, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south.
Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city in which to dwell. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them.
Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way until they reached the city in which to dwell.
Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wonderful works to humankind.
For he satisfies the thirsty, and the hungry he fills with good things.
When they are diminished and brought low through oppression, trouble, and sorrow, the Lord pours contempt on princes and makes them wander in trackless wastes.
But the Lord raises up the needy out of distress and makes their families like flocks.
The upright see it and are glad, and all wickedness stops its mouth.
Let those who are wise give heed to these things, and consider the steadfast love of the Lord.
Together, let's pray.
Almighty God, to you all hearts are open, all desires known, and from you no secrets are hidden. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of your Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love you and worthily magnify your holy name, through Christ our Lord. Amen.
I want to invite you to turn in your hymn books to number 111. That's our opening hymn. Otherwise, the words are here on the screen. following in the bulletin, I'm going to flip-flop two things and invite you before you're seated to turn and read the neighbors. I don't know if we have a lot of kids who want to come join me at the front. You can just stay there and I'll just talk about it. Okay? So we have children's time here every week, and today I want to talk about hand sanitizer of all things. And I see that we're all using that, so let's get that over here. So we've been hearing a lot in the news about a new virus that's going around, right? From Wuhan, China, and it's got everybody quite a bit concerned. So doctors and folks are working on solutions to that, and I'm glad for them. But I'm thinking too about our own practices and how we can stay healthy. And I'm thinking about two things. First is, of course, we want to work on viruses and bacteria so that we don't get sick, physically sick. And hand sanitizer is good. Covering your mouth when you cough is also important. Maybe take some vitamins. These are all important things. But when we come to church, we have another kind of sickness that we think about, and that is our own sinfulness. Right? So if I were to take a poll of everyone here and say, who's perfect this week? Nobody? How about today?
Well, but it's Sunday. It's early.
This hour? I think I touched a nerve. Right? So none of us are perfect. Right? We all make mistakes. We all say things we regret. We do things that we look back and think, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. We regret it because we hurt other people, maybe unintentionally. And so the Bible calls that sin. And fortunately, the Bible also has a solution for our sin. And that solution is to ask for forgiveness. And so, if we do things that we regret, we can go back and try to make amends and say, will you forgive me? And hopefully the person will say yes when they're ready to, and that helps us reestablish our relationship. Now the same thing is true for God. When we do things that make God unhappy, we ask for forgiveness and in prayer, and with our experiences of God's being with us, we experience and we know that love and that forgiveness as well. So I just want to encourage us as we go through the week is to think about not getting sick, okay? Both physically, but also spiritually. So do the things that you need to do, prayer, Bible study, coming to church like we did today, to keep your soul healthy and to keep your life pure like God wants it to be. So that's our children's time today. Can you all follow that? Is everyone nodding along? Okay. Let's move on. Lord, we thank you for your love and your goodness to us, even when we make mistakes and even when we don't deserve it. You are a God who loves us like a parent. And so we thank you for your forgiveness of all our sins, and we thank you for including us in your great family. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. I don't even know what comes next, but let's find out. A hymn comes next. Carolyn knew. All right. We are going to sing together number 500, and because this leads us into a time of prayer, you don't have to stand. You can if you want, but I guess we're standing. Everyone's standing.
My
So we are in a time of prayer now. I'm going to pray first, and then I want to invite all of you, or any of you, who might have a prayer to share with us, to do as we usually do, just to speak it out loud, and then we conclude with, in Jesus' name, amen. So let's bow our heads. But God, today we gather as your people, knowing and trusting in your goodness, knowing and trusting that you have a great future intended for us. Sometimes it's difficult to see when our world is so full of bad news, so full of people arguing and disagreeing about even the littlest things. So today, God, we ask that you send our Spirit to recreate us from the inside out. Give us your peace, your love, and your grace, so that when we interact with the people around us, in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our town, even online, Lord, help us to be examples and witnesses to who you are, how you changed our lives, and to how you have filled us with your light and your purpose. So we pray for each person here, that you would help us to be your people, both today and in the year to come. We pray in Jesus' name. And to this prayer we add the prayers of our congregation.
Lord, please be with my daughter and husband Dan. Let them find peace and healing from their difficulties. Bring them peace and love of God. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Please be with the Bolt family in their recent loss, and also with those who are with us today. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Please, dear God, keep my daughter safe while she's in New York with her new studies. In Jesus' name.
Amen. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. And together we say the words that he has taught us as we pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and
us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
So today we are reading from Matthew 22, verses 23 through 40. And I think I have mentioned to some of you that I've spent quite a lot of time with the Gospel of Matthew over the last, let's say, 3 years. And you're going to experience, enjoy, be subjected to, I don't know, you can decide, all of the results of all of my time with Matthew. So we're looking at Matthew 22 today, but there are certainly a lot of stories, many of which we know quite well, that we're going to dive into quite deeply in the coming year. So we've probably seen that a little bit since Christmas. We've been looking at some of those already. Today I want to give us a big picture of what Matthew is all about, and then we're going to dive right into it starting next week, and I'll say more about that in a minute. So let's read from chapter 22 of Matthew, verses 23 through 40. I invite you to hear these words from the Scripture. That same day, some Sadducees came to Jesus, saying there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies childless, his brother shall marry the widow, and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died childless, leaving the widow to marry his brother. The second did the same, so also the third, down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman herself died. So in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For all of them had married her. Jesus answered them, you are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is God not of the dead, but of the living. And when the crowd heard it, they were astounded at his teaching. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second one is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Let's pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, you all know that we are here to celebrate something that happened back in December, my graduation. And again, I want to thank everyone for not only coming and showing up today to have a party. Why wouldn't we want to do that? But also to the folks who organized this behind the scenes, thank you very much for your work, and it's much appreciated. So let's talk about what in the world I've been up to for the last a few years, right, Wendy? So when you get to graduation, and everybody knows there's some work that happens before you get there. They don't just hand out these things like Halloween candy. So how do you get to be a doctor, to earn a PhD like I just done? Well, here's what happens. Back when we were living in Missouri, I applied to several different schools. Some of them didn't want me, and some of them did. So I chose the one that gave me the biggest scholarship, but also the one that had a very good reputation, and that was Brett Divinity School at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. Sorry, all you Cyclones fans, but go Frogs. So what do you do once you get into a program like this? Well, there were 3 years of coursework, so I went down to TCU and took classes in the fall and spring semesters for 3 years, so 6 semesters of that. At the end of that, there were some tests. I passed a few language exams to make sure that I can read stuff from ancient writers and also from modern scholars who live in other parts of the world. And then there's these things called comprehensive exams, which basically is on your last 3 years of work. They want to see if you've been paying attention, and it's kind of a pass-fail thing. So I went down over a couple days, and they locked me in a room with a laptop, and I typed the answers to all the questions as best I could. So fortunately, I passed that as well. Then the last thing that you have to do is to work on this big project, a paper called a dissertation. And basically, this is something that is designed to add to human knowledge. And so what I did was think about what hasn't been said about the Gospel of Matthew. And believe me, there's a lot been written on Matthew over the years. So I found a little place that I thought I could contribute my own voice and my own words, and I got to work, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and wrote some more. Right, Wendy? It's kind of been weird over the last few months here to not have this paper hanging over my head anymore. And it's great to be done with it, and it's a big relief. So the reason I put that little red car up there is that was my traveling companion back and forth from Missouri to Texas, and so I'm glad for the blessing of a car that worked and only broke down one time. So that was a good thing. And then I just have a few of the books in a crate from the library there that goes into my brain and comes up the fingertips onto the paper, and then that results in a dissertation. So I put a copy of this on the table as you came in. You maybe saw that. If you feel like paging through it, go right ahead. Here's a hint, though, you don't have to, because I'm going to be preaching on it over the next several months. So if you don't want to work as hard as you reading through the whole thing, just show up to church and listen. So this is how you become a doctor like I have. Now, some of you are probably asking the question, why? Why would you do such a thing? Well, to be honest, this has been something I've had in my heart and on my mind for a long time. Probably ever since I got done with college, I thought, I really want to go for that, and I really want to find a way to make it happen. Now, of course, we got married, I had kids, and we're raising them, so I had to put that on hold for quite a while. But when I hit 40, I realized, I can't do this now, or it's never going to happen. So that began the journey. But as far as my faith life, I think pursuing this degree has a lot to do with who I can be as a person, and as a follower of Jesus, and also as a pastor. And so when I was working on this, I kept in mind these verses, and these are from our reading today. So the lawyer comes and asks Jesus a very smart question, just like lawyers often do, right, Steve?
Yeah,
lawyers are known for their wisdom and their smart questions.
Tough questions.
So this lawyer says, what's the greatest commandment? Right? There are 617 commandments in the Scripture. Which one of them is the most important? Well, Jesus also is a smart guy, and he knows the answer. He says this, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. So loving God with your mind, that's something that I've kept in mind as I've been working on reading these books and going to school and then churning away at this. And really, sometimes people look sideways and think, oh, why do we need all these doctrines? Can't we just have faith? Why do we have to be so highfalutin? Well, if you look at it in terms of a different way to love God, there's lots of ways that we can love and serve, right? With our hearts, in our relationships with each other, with our souls as we pray and as we seek God's guidance, but also sometimes with our minds, in the way that we organize our lives, in the way that we try to be self-disciplined. And for me, one of the ways that I do that is with my faith and with this work that I do. So for me, that's the way that my faith is translated into academic work. Now, of course, we know the second commandment that Jesus answers, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's our job every day, isn't it? And I think we're doing okay. I think we're doing a pretty good job at that. So, as I would say to my kids, keep up the good work. Now, this is all sort of a background, and the reason why we're all here for the celebration today. I do actually have a few things to share with you. As I warned you, you're going to learn some things about Matthew. So I want to teach us 6 things about Matthew's Gospel this morning, and there will not be a quiz later, so no panic. But we will be referring to these as time goes on. So I'm going to be repeating and emphasizing these things. If, of course, as I always say, if you have a question about anything, just ask me or let me know. And for all of you who don't go to Montour, sometimes in Montour people just shout out questions in the middle of the sermon. So if someone feels the Spirit moving them to do that, today it's probably means they're from Montour. Yes, Luther, I'm looking at you. It's not just Luther. I'm speaking out of All right, so here's the question. When we look at Matthew, we're often looking at very small stories. This is how our scripture readings go from week to week in church. But what I want to do today is talk about 6 big things about how Matthew does what he does. Not the why. The why is to tell us about Jesus. We already know that. But how does Matthew do this? Well, he has his own particular way, which is similar to but also different from the other Gospels that we know of. So how does Matthew do his thing? So the first thing that we should know is that Matthew has been around for a long, long time, like the other Gospels. And if you get into something called textual study, you'll go to museums and places where they store these very, very old copies of the Bible, and some of them are just little fragments. And, oh, by the way, you have to learn how to read Greek, and then you can read these little pieces and figure out what Matthew is doing and where he comes from. So what I've got here on the screen is a little fragment from the earliest copy of the Gospel of Matthew that we now have. It's from the 2nd or the 3rd century. They snipped off a little corner of it and subjected it to some radiocarbon testing, and that's how they came up with that. And so this is the earliest copy of Matthew's Gospel that we now know of. Now I put a little yellow underline on there. That's not on the actual page. But what I'm pointing out there is, if you can see at this side of the line, it looks like a letter M. And that's actually the Greek letter M. It says Mattheon, which is, so this is from the first page of the Gospel, and that's how we know. So Matthew comes from a long time ago, and the way we figure out what Matthew is all about is we have these copies. So here's a couple other ones. The first one, called Papyrus 104, is from Matthew 21, and this is the story of this a parable that Jesus tells about the workers were sent to collect from the tenants of the land, and the tenants grabbed them because they didn't like the landowner and beat them up and threw them out. And then finally, the landlord sends the son and says, "Surely they'll respect my son." This is one of the parables Jesus tells. And you can see that it's not in great condition, but there's enough there that they figure out that this is where this is from. And then the other piece on that side there, Papyrus 37, also comes from Egypt. And this is a part of Matthew 26 that tells about the Last Supper and the prayer of Jesus and his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. So we have these examples from long ago that now come into our English Bibles. So that's point number 1. Point number 2. In Matthew, there are several different ancient writers who refer to the Gospel of Matthew, and this gives us an idea of when it comes from. So the last date that Matthew could have been written by, it was earlier than these guys are writing, because they're quoting from him. So the first is Ignatius of Antioch, who was a Christian bishop and also a pretty well-known writer if you're into these histories. There's also a thing called the Didache, or the teaching, which gives us sort of a rule book for church life. And it talks about how do we baptize people, how should we pray, when do you fast, how do you celebrate the Lord's Supper. There are traveling apostles who come and go in the church at this time, and there's rules for how they should be hosted. and rules about how they shouldn't abuse this privilege. So these two writings from the early 2nd century tell us that Matthew was written before that. So probably at the end of the 1st century, before the year 100 AD. Okay, so that's sort of the text of Matthew. 2 points. And again, no quiz, so nobody panic if you can't remember all these details. So number 3, Matthew's world. Well, where was Matthew written, and why did he write the way he wrote? Well, most people think that Matthew lived in the Roman province of Syria, which I put a little box around. The borders are not a nice square box like an Iowa county, flatland, but this is sort of the general area that we think Matthew's written in. So the red arrow at the bottom there is Jerusalem. Of course, this is where Jesus is doing some of his work. And then the red arrow at the top is the city of Antioch. Antioch is the capital of Syria, and we're pretty sure that Matthew was written in the city, the capital city of Antioch. Now, why do we think this? Well, in Matthew 4, Jesus is beginning his work, and Matthew says, Jesus' fame began to spread throughout Galilee and Judea and all of Syria. Everybody knew that. Now, the other Gospels don't say that, so people wonder, well, why does he do that? Well, probably because that's where he's writing from, the province of Syria. Now, for those of you who are in a Bible study, we're working through the book of Acts. A couple weeks ago, we read some stories about how the disciples went from Jerusalem up to Antioch and founded the church there. So we talked about Peter and Barnabas, we talked about Paul and some others, and what they did when they got there is they formed these small communities of followers of Jesus and people who believed that he was and is the Messiah. Now from these groups, in the middle 1st century, eventually become the church, and this is where Matthew's gospel comes from. Now, there's a few events in Matthew's world that I think we ought to be aware of. And this is the world of the Roman Empire. Now, you may know that the Romans were very expansionistic in their foreign policy. In other words, they sent out their armies step by step and land by land to conquer other peoples and expand their own borders. And this often came at the expense of everybody else. So the Romans were also interventionists in local disputes and in political troubles on their borders. They would pick a side and say, hey, we'll be on your side, Bonnie, but we'll give you support, but sorry, Arlene, you have to go. So this is what the Romans would do time and time again on every border. And this is what we see actually in the land of Judea. So when King Herod, and who wasn't the king yet, when Herod and his family were on one side of a power struggle, Herod was thrown out. And what did he do? Well, he got on a boat and he went to Rome to beg for help from the Roman Senate. And while he was there, his sponsors were two guys you may have heard of, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And with these guys' help, Herod is declared the king of the Jews, and they sent him back home with an army backing him to try and gain control of the kingdom. And of course, Herod's promise to them was, I'll be your loyal friend and ally, which he was throughout his almost 40 years on the throne. Now, after Herod's death, his sons were ruling parts of his kingdom, and also the Romans took direct control of other parts. Now, this is what's going on in the Gospels, and why it's so confusing when we read about all the political stuff in Jesus' lifetime. Because on the one hand, we have kings, like Herod's son, Herod Antipas, and on the other hand, we have Roman governors, like Pontius Pilate, who Jesus meets right before his death. Now, the general sense that we should remember is that the more Romans increased their control, the more people hated and resented it. And so this continued generation after generation until finally the people of Judea couldn't stand it anymore, and so they rose up in a rebellion. This is what historians call the Roman-Jewish War of 66 to 70, so a 4-year war which ended very badly for the Jewish people. Thousands of them were killed, enslaved, and Jerusalem itself, including the temple, were destroyed. So if you can imagine being someone at that point of time, that's a very traumatic experience and a very difficult thing to live through. And I think we see some of that reflected in the way that Matthew tells the story. Now, the picture I put up there is from an arch, the Arch of Titus, which is in Rome. It's a victory column that the Romans put up, and it shows Roman soldiers marching off with all the treasures from the temple in Jerusalem. So you can see some trumpets, the long straight things. You can see a table, it's probably a golden table that they put offerings on. And you can see the candlestick, the menorah up there with the 7 branches. And this was a big deal for the Romans, and it was also a big deal for everybody else who were conquered by them. So these are one of the facts of history where the Bible intersects with what we know of other things, other events in the world. Now the other piece of this is the Roman generals who were in charge of this war became the emperors in the year 68. And in fact, they were the ones who built the Colosseum. You all heard of the Colosseum in Rome, this big arena where they did sporting events and gladiatorial games. You may not know that the Colosseum was paid for by the spoils from Jerusalem. So all the money, all the gold that they took and the victory for the war, they brought it back to war, and they brought it back to Rome, and they used that to pay for the Colosseum. So something to impress your friends with at the water number later on. So let's move on to point number 4, which is just to get a sense of the timeline, because I know I throw out all these facts, and especially some of you ladies in the Bible study on Tuesday, they scratch their heads and they're like, how do you know this stuff, John? And why do you know this stuff? Well, because I think it's important to keep things straight. So if we think about when Jesus was alive and doing his work in Galilee and Judea, this is around the year 30. So 30 to 33 is about when Jesus is doing his work. In the after that, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, Jesus' disciples, they start to tell everyone and continue his work. They tell people about Jesus. They form these communities, these little churches, and the church begins to spread, not only in Judea, but also all around the Roman Empire. Now, it's during this time that Paul's letters are written, so when we read in the New Testament, the book of Romans, or Corinthians, or Thessalonians, this is when Paul is doing his thing in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, as time went on, and all the stories about Jesus were told and retold, the original disciples with Jesus began to die. As you'd expect, they got old, and the church said, we need to remember these stories. We want to get them right, and we want to keep them straight. So they began to write them down. And the first gospel that wrote these down in a coherent form, like we have it today, was Mark, probably sometime in the 60s. After him were Matthew, Luke, and John. So Matthew, we think, was probably written around the year 35. And again, there's no quiz, but just a general sense. I'm trying to give you guys some pieces of information. Okay, point number 5. Now here we get to Matthew and Matthew's story. Well, like I said, oftentimes when we read the Gospels in church, we read one story. We read about a parable, or we read about a healing story, or something that Jesus said to somebody. And what I want to give us here with this little graphic is a big picture. So there's a New Testament scholar named Eugene Boring who uses this language, so I'm borrowing from him. And he talks about Matthew as the conflict of kingdoms. Now, on the one hand, he says there is the kingdom that Jesus represents, and that is the kingdom of God's purposes and God's values. The kingdom of heaven is what Matthew often calls it. And so on this side are all the things that we're accustomed to learning about when Jesus teaches. We want to be part of what God's up to. We want to be part of that kingdom. Now, in contrast to this, there is the kingdom which is represented by Herod and Pilate and the soldiers. Sometimes this kingdom is called the kingdom of Satan or the kingdom of darkness. Sometimes the Jewish leaders, not all the Jewish folks, but sometimes the leaders who are allied with the Romans are called the enemies of God. And so we have this contrast. Okay? On the one hand are God and God's people and God's values. On the other are people who claim the same thing but aren't really living out God's values. So Eugene Boring divides Matthew into 2 parts. Part 1, chapters 1 through 12, which introduces this conflict and then defines what it's all about. So a couple weeks ago we read about King Herod, and he sends his soldiers out to kill the children of Bethlehem. This is an example of how the kingdom of darkness is acting against God's people. And who's on the other side? Well, of course, Jesus is, the infant Jesus, who has to run away, and later he'll come back to do something about this problem. So in part 2, this conflict is developed and finally resolved. We know that Jesus, of course, is crucified and dies, but then is resurrected. And so the gospel ends on a positive note, and this is where the church comes from all these years later. Now, within this big structure, lots of other scholars have identified something they call teaching blocks. And these are 5 big sections that Matthew plops right in the middle of his gospel, where Jesus is teaching about various things. Now, these are found in chapters 5 through 7, 10, 13, 18, and 3. And we'll see more on these as the year goes on. But I just want to point out that Matthew structures his whole story around these 5 blocks of teaching because he wants to show his audience, including us, how important Jesus is as a teacher. Now, in fact, next week we're going to turn to the Sermon on the Mount, 5 through 7. And Jesus starts out by saying, "Blessed are you who," and he goes on and has a lot to say there. So we're going to dive into these a little deeper. But I just want to point out today again how Matthew does what he does in order to teach us. Now, let's get back finally to our scripture reading this morning, and this is point number 6 that I'd like to make. If you remember, we heard that Jesus is in the temple, and while he's there teaching in the temple at the end of the gospel, different groups of Jewish teachers come up to him, and they're challenging him and saying, "Well, what is it exactly that you're trying to teach folks anyway, Jesus?" They're challenging his authority. And so with the Sadducees, they're the first group that come, they propose to him a hypothetical, sort of a test case, a what if. And they're trying to show how silly the idea of resurrection is. And so they propose, well, let's say there was one man and he was married to a wife and he died, and then he has 6 brothers, and the poor woman has to marry each of these 6 brothers in turn, and then finally they all die. Isn't resurrection silly? So they're trying to prove to Jesus his stance is ridiculous. Now, Jesus replies, and he reasons it out with them, and he answers them that they've got the wrong framework, and he talks to them about what's wrong with their position. Now, this part of the story ends with this line in verse 33. When the crowd hears what Jesus says, they are astounded at his teaching. That's a good thing. Now, in the second half of our reading, the Pharisees hear what's happening with the other group, the Sadducees, and they send one of their own, one of these lawyers, right, Steve? One of these lawyers to ask Jesus that question, what is the greatest commandment? Well, Jesus answers the words that we probably all know. You should love God with all your heart, and all your soul, and all your mind. And the second is like it, you should love your neighbor as yourself. Now, again, Matthew concludes this little piece of the story with this. No one was able to give Jesus an answer. And from that day on, no one dared to ask him any more questions. So Jesus is the teacher that we ought to listen to. Now, based on this and other stories like it in the Gospel, many scholars believe that in Matthew's time, these groups are groups that are competing with him and with the church. And they're trying to prove to their hearers who is the most faithful interpreter of what we would call the Old Testament. They're arguing over who has the proper interpretation of the Bible. It sounds a lot like today, doesn't it? We still do this kind of thing today. So part of the meaning, I think, of this passage is to show how Jesus' teaching to Matthew's audience and also to us is both smart and proper and something that we ought to follow. So again, this is one of Matthew's goals as he's writing to us. Okay, so here's 6 things that I've given you that we all know now about Matthew's story. Again, no quiz, please don't panic. But I will be reminding us of these things later on, because I think if we weave them all together in terms of our knowledge, and as we integrate them into how we read the stories that we're going to be reading, it will deepen and it will enrich our biblical knowledge and hopefully our faith. Now, what's left today then is to return to our Scripture and return the challenge of the Scripture back to us. So Jesus says to this lawyer in response, I think a question that all of us need to ask ourselves. How can we love God? How can we love God? today? How can we love God this week? How can we love God all through this coming year with our heart, with our soul, with our mind? And also, how can we love our neighbors, God's children, as much as we love ourselves and our own interests? Now, when we keep these questions in our minds, I think our lives will be blessed. They will be challenged sometimes, but they will also be enriched because we will be participating in Jesus' purposes for our church, for us, and for our world. So I'll leave you with these. And of course, the answers to these are how we live faithfully in our world yet today. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word that comes to us, and we thank you for opportunities to love you with our hearts, our souls, our minds, and our actions, and everything that we do. We pray that we might be faithful, as Matthew was faithful. We pray that we might be disciples, as Jesus calls us to be, as we follow after him in all that we do and say and who we are. We pray these things in his most holy name. Amen. I thought since we were all together, it would be a great opportunity for us to celebrate a meal which binds us together as Jesus followers. And so we are going to celebrate communion today as one people. If anyone's worried that we're not having communion next week back at our three churches, yes, we're also having communion next week too. So we'll be back on our normal schedule. But today, I want us to gather around this table as people of faith, people who are seeking to overcome our sins and our sinfulness by the grace of God, people who are seeking to be faithful in all things, both with our words and our actions and all that we do. And so today, we remember how Jesus called his own disciples around the table, much like this one. We remember also how he took a loaf of bread and, breaking it, offered it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat it, in remembrance of me." At that same supper, Jesus also took a cup. He gave thanks to God and offered it to his disciples, saying, "This is my blood, a new covenant, poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. As often as you do this, do so in remembrance of me." Oh God, we ask that you would pour out your Spirit on us who are gathered here, and all these gifts of bread and wine, make them be for us the body and blood of Christ, so that we might be his people, called, forgiven, redeemed, and sent into the world in his name. By your Spirit, make us one with Christ, one with each other, and one in ministry to all the world, until Christ returns and we feast with him at the heavenly banquet. All honor and glory is yours, Almighty Father, now and forever. Amen. Now we are familiar, I think, with the way we're going to do communion today, each in our own churches, but we do that the same in each place. We'll come down the center aisle, receive the bread and the cup, and then return to your seats by the side aisle. If you are not able to get up, just raise your hand at the end and we will bring the communion to you. You also see our three offering plates here. They're each labeled with a name. So find the right one if you'd like your offering to go into the right pocket when we count that up at the end of the service. Let me invite the communion assistants to come, and then we're all invited and welcome at Jesus' table. Let's pray. O Lord, you have given yourself to us in this holy mystery. Now send us out into the world to be light and life and grace to all we meet. In Jesus' name, amen. So we have one final hymn to sing. And I want to give you some directions from the kitchen folks before we get all excited and start running out to food, okay? So I'm assuming most folks are going to stay for lunch, and that's wonderful. If you are not, we'd like you to go out first after the benediction so that we don't have a big line. You know how that goes. So if you can leave first and just give the kitchen folks just like 3 minutes to finish setting out things. We'll get you out of the way, and then they'll let us know over here when it's time to line up. We're going to go that way, and then that way to get okay? I think I got that right. So let's stand and sing together number 668. Brothers and sisters, let us go out on God's mission in the world, gathering, growing together. Amen.